An entitled Karen, determined to make an already difficult life for me even worse, completely obliterates my once-in-a-lifetime experience of seeing the fountain show by secretly pulling and pushing me in my wheelchair away from my family, putting my safety at risk. Here's what happened. Subscribe to You're the Jerk and hit the bell to turn on notifications. So a few years ago I was living in Vegas and a random Karen literally wheeled me away from my family. I have a number of health issues and after a few botched surgeries and neurological damage I was bedridden. I never left my bed except for doctor appointments. I hadn't been out at all for 2.5 years. I had worked really hard on my daily physical therapy and my balance had greatly improved. My family came out for a visit, my husband was stationed at Nellis, and I was so excited to surprise them with my improvements. I could stand and walk, and was actually wearing pants. To celebrate I wanted to go see the fountains at the Bellagio. For most people this is a nice outing but for me this was years in the making. I was nervous I might get overtired and lost in the fast-moving crowds, so we had to bring my wheelchair. We knew the schedule for the fountains and arrived super early to secure a spot in front where I could see from my chair. It was such an important moment for all of us. We lined up by the fence, and no sooner did the show start, I felt this jerking on my wheelchair. I thought maybe someone had tripped on me, and I immediately looked up to apologize. I was pretty self-conscious and ashamed of being out in a wheelchair in such a big crowd. When I glanced up to apologize, I see this woman with a small child on her hip using one hand to literally pull me away from the fence. Because she was only using one hand, she spun me completely around to face the street. I was stunned. I could hear everyone reacting to the fountain show, and here I was looking dumb awkwardly facing a bunch of strangers. I yelled for my husband, but he couldn't hear me over the noise. I looked behind me, and this woman had plopped her child up onto the guardrail. Never made eye contact with me, never said one word to me, and had treated me like a piece of luggage. I tried to stand up, but the people around me had crowded me so much I didn't have room to push my chair back enough. I desperately looked around at the strangers in front of me, hoping someone who had seen what happened would help. It then dawned on me that this was a huge family friend group. They all began nudging me aside, further and further away from my family. It all happened so fast. I found myself pushed into the walking area, where people who weren't stopping to watch the fountain show were quickly trying to walk past. People couldn't see me through the crowd and were stumbling over past me. I couldn't see my family anymore and was trying hard to push myself up out of my chair the way my physical therapist had taught me. I feel someone grabbing my chair again and I panicked. I start yelling, "No, please, no!" and then realized it was my husband. He had glanced to check on me and to take a picture of me being out for the first time, and I was gone. He had to fight his way through the crowd, the same family group, to find me. I burst into tears. I don't know why, but it was like all the trauma from the last few years hit me all at once. I told him they had pushed me away, and after putting it together, my husband was pissed. He turned to this group of people and demanded to know who had pushed me away. By this time the fountain show was pretty much over. The group initially just ignored my husband like they had me, until I pointed out the woman with her child as the culprits. My family confronted her, nicely I might add, and tried to explain why a wheelchair is an extension of a person, etc. She at first pretended like she didn't speak English, but I had heard them talking amongst themselves in English while they pushed me into the walking area, and I told my husband as much. She then gave up that act and told my family about how I was in their way, and probably couldn't see anyway. And the man with her claimed, in a raised voice, that, in their country they don't take their shameful family members out in public. To which my husband responded, "If that were true, none of you would be here." I was maybe even more shocked by his last sentence than being wheeled away. I managed the courage to tell him that what he said was bullshit, and that I'm sure people in your country are actually kind and would be proud if I was their daughter. I remember the exact words I said because later I was very proud that I stood up to them. The group sort of collectively scoffed, spoke to one another quickly in what I think was Hindi, and slowly walked away as if nothing happened. We didn't stay for the next show because I just wanted to go home. I don't know which is worse, pushing a disabled person in a wheelchair out of your way or wrongly painting your countrymen as prejudice. Wow, OP, that is just absolutely insane. I can't believe that there are people out there who would treat another human being like that, let alone someone who is in a wheelchair. The audacity of that Karen to just wheel you away from your family without a single word of explanation or even acknowledgement is beyond me. And then to try and play the language barrier card? That's just low. I'm so sorry that you had to go through that experience, especially after working so hard to be able to go out and see the fountains. It's heartbreaking to think that there are people out there who are so entitled and selfish that they would disregard the needs and feelings of others like that. I'm glad that your husband was there to stand up for you and that you were able to speak your mind to that group. It's important to let people know that that kind of behavior is not acceptable and that we won't stand for it. I hope that this experience hasn't deterred you from going out and experiencing experiencing the world, and I hope that you continue to make progress in your physical therapy. What do you guys think of this crazy situation? Have you ever encountered a Karen like this in public? Let me know in the comments. My Karen teacher was rude, sexist, and even brought illegal fireworks to the class and actually endangered the lives of students. I took matters into my own hands, recorded all of his dangerous antics, and sent it to the school board and got his ass fired. Here's the story on how it all happened. I went to a ghetto high school in a poor community, but my parents raised me to work my ass off so I could get out of there. My parents never went to college, but because of this, myself and my siblings have all gone to good schools out of state. I maintained a 4.0 until the year in question in high school, taking 5 advanced courses a year. I learned to get very little sleep because of the amount of work these courses required, and because my school didn't have tutoring aids or anything of the like. Didn't understand something? Tough luck. Get to Googling. So in one of my upperclassmen years, I signed up for an advanced chemistry course. I knew it would be hard, but assumed, like the rest of my courses, that if the class was minimally structured and Google came through per usual, I would be fine. Other students warned me not to take the course, but since I wanted to go to college for chemistry, I knew I had to go through with it. The teacher was horrible. He was old, which is fine, and didn't offer after-class support, which was normal, but also didn't even offer in-class support. His answer to even basic questions was, "You should understand that. Talk to me about it later." But later never came. He didn't offer lunch hours, didn't offer after-school hours, and in class would just put up the answers. My family didn't have fancy tutor money, and none were readily available in my community anyways. I studied my ass off, but when the first test came back I had a D-, with no notes to even understand what I had done wrong. When I went to speak with him about it right after class ended, he simply told me to look more closely at the textbook for help, and that he didn't have time for me. He was 2 weeks behind the explanations that he did give, because he was constantly distracted. All of this is bad, but didn't deserve him being fired yet. What did was when he got dangerous. In an experiment working with hydrochloric acid, a plug held the concentrated stuff in a tube with some magnesium and reacted to form hydrogen bubbles. Well, one of the other students in my group didn't plug the thing properly, and the plug fell out. So I asked him how to get the tube back, expecting him to tell us to discard the hydrochloride solution, rinse with water, and start over. I'd read the safety section in my textbook, which had this approach to working with acids. His response? He insisted that I stick my ungloved hand in the solution and just grab the plug and then still in the solution plug it back in. He wouldn't even put his own hand in to do it, so my high school self thought this was an inherently bad idea. I took some more MG from the workbench and kept adding it to the solution until it stopped reacting, eating up all the hydrochloride to just leave water. And it kept getting worse. One day, he brought what he claimed were illegal fireworks into the classroom and started setting them off. He thought it was funny to point them at us, wearing no safety equipment or goggles, and hoodies that could have easily caught the fiery things. He frequently would leave the room while a group of high school kids were playing with Bunsen burners and caustic chemicals. So in combination with the total lack of education I was getting, I didn't feel safe. Did I mention he was sexist too? I'm a girl, by the way. All of the boys got A's on tests with no explanations. He even lost one of the other boys' tests and straight up said in front of me and the rest of the class that we would just give him an A-, assuming that he had done well. Later on, I had asked the other student for help understanding something, and even he didn't know what was going on in the course, so I knew it was just bullshit. Every other girl I asked was getting the same inexplicable grades as I was. This wasn't unusual on its own either, as I lived in a very conservative area and had several sexist teachers. Just usually they'd at least still grade fairly. Last contextual thing, my high school teachers union had negotiated for tenure. After coming to college, I've learned that this is a very unusual thing, and in retrospect, it's an idiotic thing. This chemistry teacher was tenured, which meant that there was basically no way to fire him. Honestly, I felt bad for the bitter old man, because after a botched surgery he was constantly in pain. He was still teaching because he refused to retire, and he had a son going through college that he needed to pay for. But at a certain point, this was affecting my chances of getting into college. I wasn't about to let one man's issues affect prospects for the rest of my life. So I looked up recording laws for my state and found that it was a one-party consent state, meaning that I could legally record my teacher Audio Ally as long as the campus didn't say anything against it, and I was one of the parties consenting. So for a month, with my grade tanking despite hours of studying and 3 study books on the course, I recorded him. I recorded his fireworks, his lambasting female students, his crying in the back chemical storage room leaving us unsupervised. I recorded the 3 times he had left campus inexplicably, leaving the front office to send a last-minute substitute to open the door and let us in. You know the 15 minutes and I'm legally allowed to leave meme? That was a constant joke for my class. And then I made a throwaway Gmail to make a throwaway Dropbox account. I uploaded everything and emailed it to my superintendent with the ultimatum that if something wasn't done, I would email the recordings to the local news, and that I really didn't want to do that. Within a day I heard back, with her assuring me that I wouldn't be punished for ratting him out. My parents, her, and myself met. We went over my grades, my unmarked tests and homework, and the videos. They asked me first to talk over my concerns with the teacher, and I said I was uncomfortable with that given his treatment of female students. The superintendent said she wouldn't tell the teacher who had submitted the evidence, but that they needed to speak with him about the concerns to hear his side of the story. My parents and I said that was completely reasonable, as long as my name was never mentioned. The next day, the teacher said he needed to speak with me after class alone. I told him I couldn't, as I had another course after that, and he said that it was important. I turned my phone's recorder again right before the class ended, and as I was packing, the teacher approached me. Due to the shape of the classroom, I was literally backed into a corner, and would have had to push this man to the side to get out. He then started saying that one of the students in the course had brought unfounded concerns and lies to the administration about what was going on in the course, and that he knew we hadn't always gotten along well, but that he hoped I wouldn't have done that to him. I lied through my teeth and said that I didn't know what he was talking about, that he was making me uncomfortable by blocking my access to the door, and that I was late for my next class. He didn't even deny what I was saying, just said that since I clearly had a problem with him, he'd be willing to stay after class to help me specifically, since it seemed like I was struggling so much. After that, I told him I really needed to get to my next course, and he finally moved. I emailed the superintendent that recording during my next course and CC'd my parents. My parents were furious. The superintendent was mad too, because while my parents were poor, they dressed up nicely. My mom was an expert in bluffing about getting a lawyer, that we totally couldn't afford. So a liability lawsuit was probably ringing through the lady's mind. Since the district couldn't fire him, he was put on immediate, permanent medical leave. While the district was still paying his full pay, they gave us one unqualified substitute after another. 2 months before the national exam for the course, they gave us a female teacher that they had pulled out of retirement, but that had actually taught the advanced chemistry course for years. She was a godsend, and even held 8-hour Saturday classes so that we could catch up with the curriculum at least enough to pass the class. In those 2 months, we covered just enough of the test's material that our class had a 50% pass rate. The superintendent also wrote me a thank you college recommendation letter, partially to keep me quiet and partially because they had been trying to get rid of this guy for years. My little sister took this course a couple of years after me, and said that the new teacher was competent, and they were still at that 50% pass rate. Oh my goodness, this story is absolutely insane. I can't believe the level of negligence and disregard for safety that this chemistry teacher had. And the fact that he was sexist too? Ugh, Karen much? OP did the right thing by recording all of his behavior and sending it to the superintendent. It's so frustrating that because of his tenure, there was basically nothing that could be done until OP took matters into her own hands. It's ridiculous that the school district was paying him his full salary while he was on permanent medical leave. But I'm so glad that OP was able to make a difference and get a competent teacher in the classroom. It's not fair that her education was being affected by one teacher's incompetence and dangerous behavior. And kudos to her for maintaining a 4.0 while taking such difficult courses and dealing with all of this. What do you guys think of this absurd situation? Have any of you had a teacher like this before? Let me know in the comments.